All right, we do have attendees joining, so we'll get started with our 5 o'clock session. This features Patrick McMahon, who is the Director of Exhibitions at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and also works with the coin collection at the Museum of Fine Arts, which is one of our little known institutional collections in this country. And he's going to be speaking on some of the early history of that collection and the people who worked with it. So, Patrick, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Len. Thanks everyone for showing up. I just want to start by saying that this is a work in progress. I've been interested in these two numismatists for a while, and there's not a lot out there, so learning about them is a slow process. But I want to accomplish today is to sort of demonstrate that they were bona fide numismatists, that they were known to their peers. That wasn't like something they did in private or secret. They were well known, and that their collection, when it came to the museum, was foundational in building the what came next. And so, in by 1890 or so, in the 19th century, the numismatic field had, was going pretty strong. There's definitely a lot of, famous collections being sold, a lot of auctions. Some of the, older big collectors were moving on, putting their things out there. But the buying isn't happening from institutions. Institutions are not acquiring things. People aren't necessarily giving them to institutions except for maybe a one-off or whatever. So by, like I said, around 1890, the situation in Boston in particular is pretty well documented in an article from the American Journal of Numismatics. And it's very specific to Boston, but the journal is being published here in Boston, and the Boston Numismatic Society is the one who are doing it. And it ranges over the various public institutions that you could go to, whether it's the library or the Natural History Society, and talks about, how little numismatic material there is to see. And even at the art museum, there's a collection of ancient coins that are on loan, and there are, casts from the British Museum that everybody had. But there's not a lot really to see if you're a curious member of the public. So all the other stuff is happening in non-public spaces. So the author basically goes on to say that, they hope that, you know someone would, help the museum, get started in cataloging collections that are public, so that people can learn from them, can compare modern and ancient. And this runs in the July 1890 issue of the American Journal of Numismatics, and the editors push back a little bit in the footnote there to say that, there's good stuff at the at the Massachusetts Historical Society, and there is, but the Massachusetts Historical Society is definitely not accessible to the general public. And the Athenaeum only sometimes is, and when the last time they were showing coins was in the early 1870s, when the MFA was actually using their galleries. This doesn't go on for too much longer. So about a year later, in December of 1891, Miss Rebecca Salisbury dies and leaves her collection to the MFA, along with a library and $500 to build a case to display the coins in, which is probably the smartest part of what she did there, because then there's no excuse. The museum can't say they have no place to put the stuff. And this is an article from the Boston Globe. So, again, at this time, these people are known, and particularly in the sort of the collector's circle. So in a more specialized journal that runs at the same time when she passes away, they seem to know quite a bit more about the collection, because they say the Salisbury collection has long been known among amateurs, that it formerly belonged to a Miss Jones, who bequeathed it to Miss Salisbury, in whose hands its development has continued. And so for a long time, that's basically the information that I had. We had all the material that came with them, which is pretty daunting. But in the files of the museum, it basically says exactly this: that the collection is inherited in part from Anna Jones and then given to the museum by Rebecca. And you can see this is the summer 1894 catalog of the museum. That basically the description that was in the article in 1890 is pretty accurate. There's the reproductions from the British Museum. There's the Rindge collection, which the museum does not own. There's some table metals on loan. And then here you can see the coins that come from Salisbury are finally being shown. It took a couple of years, but this is just the earliest documented proof I could find that they were actually on view. And so, you know, who were these people? Anna Powell Jones and Rebecca Salisbury, and they're actually both quite interesting. So a lot on this slide, but I think it's important to sort of get an idea of what things are kind of going on in Anna's life when she's active as a numismatist. And she comes from a very large family. She's the youngest. Her family seems to just impose on her with their responsibilities. So if you look in the census records, you'll see that she has a child living with her who's actually the grandson of Oliver Hazard Perry. Perry was married to one of her cousins. Of course, he died early. And there's also something I don't know quite what it means, but that she's sponsoring one of her brother's stepsons. And her brother was John Coffin Jones Jr. He was the first consul from the U.S. to the Kingdom of Hawaii. He was a successful merchant, but he when he goes to Hawaii, he marries a widow who has two sons, and they have one child together. And while he's with her, he has a mistress, and they have three more kids. And then he goes to California, and he marries another person and has six kids. And then when his Hawaiian wife finds out that he's married again, she sues him for bigamy, and he loses his standing in the Hawaiian court. So he comes back to Boston with his family, and he's got health issues. And so in the Codman genealogy files at the Boston Athenaeum, it says that Anna was basically her father's partner in helping manage his business at the end of his life. But I think it's really her brother, because she's pretty young when her father dies, and she certainly could have been helping in the business, but I don't know if she could have been helping for long enough to have been remembered for that. And you know, her brother, he had epilepsy, he had other issues, he had seizures, and in his will, he actually appoints his sister the guardian of all his children, despite the fact that their mother is alive and well and there. And he has a bad seizure in 1856 or 57, and she becomes his power of attorney, and she does conduct his business in addition to all these other things that are going on with her. But she's independent, and she has her own place. And so trying to figure out how she's connected with the Salisburys, I found that the families actually go back quite a long way. And so while she's coming out, her there's a record in the Brattle Street Church of her becoming a communicant there with Elizabeth Salisbury, which is Rebecca's sister, and her own sister Mary. They happen in the same day. And basically, the communicants are able to elect the pastor. So it's a sort of democratic body within the church. And the Brattle Street Church is a famous church that was torn down in 1872, I think. But you know, all the patriots attended the church. Was Congregationalist and then Unitarian. And what's important here is that while during this chapter of Anna's life, John Gorham Palfrey is the minister, and they definitely become close. And there is definitely some correspondence between them in the Palfrey papers at Harvard, which I haven't seen yet. And so what I have seen is a lot of ephemera that's tucked in their books, their journals, and other things. And this one, for example, shows the Brattle Street Church again, but it's from March of 1868. So the connection with the church and the Salisburys, at least, continues well beyond Anna's lifetime. And something like this, if I could find the church record, I might be able to see what family M is and find another group of papers or person to pursue as a way of trying to learn more about them, narrow the search. And then in her library books themselves, the earliest strictly numismatic book that there is with an inscription, it dates to 1849, and it's one that was given to her by Martha. She had a sister named Martha who ended up living in New York, so I'm assuming that's who this is from. It's a fairly handsome book, and at least it documents that she had a numismatic interest in the 1840s. There's a, a book of heraldry that dates to 1848, has an inscription from 1848. And they definitely are interested in heraldry, but doesn't necessarily prove a numismatic interest at that stage. And so that's really I don't have much more for the 1840s, but in 1850, again, the idea of finding a scrawled note somewhere. This time, it's not in her papers; it's actually in the journals of Ralph Waldo Emerson. And for some reason, her name and address appears in one of his journals with no context. And from this, the transcribers of the journals have speculated that it's a group of women who might have attended the conversations that Margaret Fuller had at Elizabeth Peabody's house. So it'd be very interesting to find out if Anna participated in them, but clearly her associates did. There is a list in the memoirs. It's a shortened list, but Anna does not appear on it. So I don't have her connected to Margaret Fuller or Elizabeth Peabody, but I do have a very sort of loose connection to Emerson that has to be explored. The other person that has left a trace of her that she encounters in the 1850s is Daniel Grew. Now, Daniel Grew, he's very well known. I think, it's only in the last maybe couple of decades that people have learned more and more about him, about what a sort of scoundrel he was. But he really puts himself out there as a genius professor with a collection of coins, and he's very charismatic. He's very good at getting into people's lives, and he's trying to, at least in 1852 here, he's trying to get the Library of Congress to purchase his collection and pay him to be the curator of it. And he puts together this portfolio. It includes things that he's written himself and a bunch of references vouching for him. And in this is his calling card, which is glued to the cover of these pamphlets that were given out, has 4 references listed at the bottom, and they're all very, very dubious. The first one is Edward Everett, who's president at Harvard College. Sounds good. And then there's Charles Francis Adams, who definitely wouldn't be vouching for Daniel Grew. Daniel Grew owes him a lot of money, and a section of Grew's collection is basically being held by Adams until the money is to be repaid. Charles D. Jackson, maybe. He's the one who claimed to have discovered ether in surgeries. He seems to claim a lot of things that other people claim. And then there's John C. Jones, Esquire, West Newton. This is Anna's brother, John Coffin Jones. And I can't think of anything that he has in common with Grew other than the fact that they both married multiple people at one time. And I think it's unlikely that John Coffin Jones actually would have vouched for Grew. But he fails at this, and next thing he tries is to dispose of his collection by lottery. And the lottery is, he published in a catalog. He lists his people who are vouching for him, and you can see right here is Anna P. Jones, right in the middle. And Anna, her letter is dated 1852, which is clearly not the year that this is happening. It's back at the time when he was trying to get his collection acquired by the government. So, she probably wrote him a recommendation at that time. Unlikely she wrote a recommendation for this time, and a lot of these are dated prior to this year. And it's a goofy idea, and it doesn't go very well for him. And but at least it's important to point out, though, that she's describing herself as someone who's knowledgeable in numismatics. So there's that, and this is a numismatic publication. So again, people know who she is, and at the point where Grew realizes, I think he's not doing so well selling his tickets, he issues a flyer that basically says all the people who've bought tickets so far in the first 15 days of December, and he kind of gives away, I think, his game here. Here's the flyer, and I'm really grateful to Joel Oros shared this with me. I wanted to see if Anna bought one of the tickets, and she has not. In fact, none of the people who provide references for him have actually bought any tickets, and so there's a contradiction there. The only one that has actually is Winslow Lewis, and Winslow Lewis, it takes a long time to give up on Grew. But the sale doesn't go forward, and I'm not sure how he gets out of it. Presumably he doesn't pay people back, and there he has a knack for leaving town at the right time, I guess. But going through the notebooks, I found him, and I'm really grateful to another colleague, Catherine O'Reilly, who stayed late to pull some of this stuff out for me, because I wanted to find a book that was definitely just Anna's handwriting, so I could be really try to be more sure about some of these other things. And here's this listing, and it's perfect for Grew. And I hadn't noticed it before. I just wanted to find an example of her handwriting, and it just looked down and it happened to be Grew. But she says she bought a coin from him, or he brought a coin, and then it's writing is Nudian. I don't even know if that is a thing, if I'm transcribing it right. And then later on, someone's crossed out the header in pencil and written "found incorrect" next to the coin. And there's no coin that this could be that came to the museum later on. So who knows what they did with it or what it was. But the fact that she got something from Grew that wasn't what it was seems appropriate. And then, sort of moving on to the 1860s, that the lead from Ralph Waldo Emerson paid off, and I found some letters, and I would never have found them if I wasn't searching specifically with Emerson, because it's Miss Jones and Anna Jones. But what's interesting here is that she's throwing a May Day party for him and his brother doesn't want to go, so he doesn't go. But Emerson's afraid to go. It's all women. He's going to be there by himself, and he has a good time. And he ends one of the letters to his brother by saying, I shall, in consequence of this party, renew my acquaintance with Anne Salisbury, Anna Jones, and Elizabeth Joy. I don't know who Elizabeth Joy is, but Anne Salisbury is one of Rebecca's sisters, and Anna Jones is who we're talking about. And this is not the famous Emerson School for Girls that they're celebrating like a reunion for. It's one that operated in Emerson's mother's boarding house for a number of years in the beginning to mid 1820s. So it's possible that she attended that school, and if she did, the rest of them are this generation. They're the students and the teachers are basically the same age, which is interesting. And then the other resource, which is very useful for learning a little bit about Anna, is Hedwig Schober's diaries, which are in the New England Historic Genealogical Society. And this goes from 1860, I think it says, till 1884. They go through 1872 that you can find online. And there's lots of great anecdotal information and things about these different people. And the Salisburys are there. She's clearly a member of their circle. And when Anna dies, which comes as a sudden surprise to everyone, she's deeply affected by it. So there's a lot of description. She slipped on some ice, and then within a day or so, with incredible pain, and then one thing led to another. But within a few days, she had died, and her death certificate says congestion of the lungs. So maybe there was a few things going on there. But the Schober diary, because this happens in January, the beginning of the book has Anna's obituary pasted into it, which is hard to find. And she talks about how she lost her friend or whatever. And this obituary is interesting because it has no signature, but there is one bound copy at the Massachusetts Historical Society that says it was written by John Gorham Palfrey, who I was talking about earlier in the context of the Brattle At this time, he's postmaster of Boston. And what's sort of frustrating about an obituary like this is it doesn't really tell you much about things that she's done. It starts telling you about how wealthy her father is, and then how that enabled her to be generous, and how generous she is with her time, how generous she is with her attention, how generous she is in, how wonderful person, whatever. But it doesn't really tell you things she did. It just basically describes her as a resource for others, and not a person who had their own things to do. And then King's Chapel is another place I've tried to find information, because there is a publication that says she's buried in the family crypt, which is in the basement of the chapel. It is impossible, though, apparently. The crypts in Boston were all ordered to be sealed sometime in the mid 1850s, and by 1860 they forced them all to be sealed. There were open air crypts, so you can imagine they weren't that sanitary, but there is an Anna Powell Jones that's listed as being buried in there, and it is another child, a sister, that died in infancy just before her, and they use the name again. So it's all very confusing, and I am grateful to Marissa Heifetz, who's the history director at the church. She's been trying to help me figure out where is Anna, because it does say on her death certificate Chapel 16, and that is the number on the family tomb. So it's sort of confusing, but this is where the Anna's story basically ends for now. And then Rebecca, there's Salisbury's and Jones is also here, and up the street in the Granary Burial Ground. The families go way back in colonial Boston. And here's some information about Rebecca. Basically, the difference between Rebecca's experience, I think, and Anna's experience as individuals is that Anna's on her own, but obviously not alone. And Rebecca's family, they never separate. One of her sisters and one of her brothers gets married. The sister is widowed and comes back, but they live together. They live with their mother until she passes away. And so, at the end, the last survivor is Rebecca, but she has unmarried sisters and an unmarried brother. They live together their entire lives. And near the end of their life, sometime after the 1860s, they move into this giant townhouse, which is 42 Mount Vernon Street, and it's the right-hand entrance is their half. But there was always plenty of room for them. Before that, they lived in Temple Place. This is where they moved from. So a lot of the things that are hers say 16 Temple Place on them, and 16 is down on the right there. Those trees, that's the Boston Common. And I wanted to show this because the buildings on the left, right behind them is West Street, and there are a couple of protected buildings there. The Brattle Bookshop is famous, and but the Papagayo, the what used to be a Papagayo, this is where Elizabeth Peabody had her bookstore, and so it's a landmark building. You can see the green thing on it, but basically the Salisburys lived very close to the Peabodys, and the rest of them lived just on the other side of the Boston Common. So there's a lot of proximity. And then I want to jump into what some of these journals, catalogs, and other things look like. And I'm starting with John Hull, because I think it would have been must have been a particular interest to her. There's two versions of the catalog. One is sort of like a draft that is marked up over time, and then there's this sort of consolidated one. And you can tell whatever this was rewritten, it was before 1875, because there's a footnote above that last piece of orange crayon that says, for the true story, check C. Crosby's book, and that's added later. And this is the famous story of how Hull became the mint master, how Hannah Hull, his daughter, received her dowry in Massachusetts silver, her weight in Massachusetts silver, and goes on from there. And it must have been particularly interesting to Rebecca, because Hannah's son was Joseph Sewell. His son was Samuel Sewell. His daughter was Elizabeth Sewell, and her son was Samuel Salisbury, who was Rebecca Salisbury's father. So she's the fifth or fourth great granddaughter of John Hull. And these coins you see at the right are the coins that are described here on the page. They had 7 pieces of Massachusetts silver. we still have these two from that collection. The other thing that I want to mention is that in her will, where she gives everything to the museum, she also mentions a separate set of medals that, or she calls them her medals, and she's giving them to the museum, which is in the library at in Leominster. And they have a big estate in Leominster and family ties that go way back in Leominster. And I want to thank Mary Murata, who's one of the vice presidents in the Historical Society, for answering the phone. I just called one time, and she actually answered the phone, which nobody does anymore. And she said, "Oh yeah, we have a trunk of her medals." And sure enough, they do. And so these hadn't really been looked at. There's some fairly nice things there. There's a lot of casts, but there's some fairly nice things in it. It's still preserved. And one thing that was very useful for me in this was that there were several pages of lists of what's in the trays, and that's a great document of this is Rebecca's handwriting. So try to help me tell the difference between Rebecca and his handwriting, because it's actually really hard to do. They write very carefully and formally when they're thinking that it's their thing, and then there's scratch and notes. It over decades their handwriting changes. It's very hard to tell who's writing what. And this was a good find. And then getting to the library, again, I have to thank colleagues Paul McAlpine and Jordan Barnes pulled all these out for me. These are kept in locked in special collections, but this is a good example of what you find. This Moons Belustigung, which I guess is the Coin Amusement magazine. It came out weekly, believe it or not, for 30-something years, and I think we have all of them. There's 23 bound volumes, and many of them have pages of manuscript material tucked in the front. There's also ephemera to be found in them. It looks like in this case, they're making notes that match up to specific medals or coins that are shown in some of the issues as they go along. And here's some of the ephemera that came out of those magazines. And again, you can see how these things can be useful. So this is actually a calling card, an invitation to a party for Mrs. Austin, who is Rebecca's widowed sister. And written all over it is different, I guess this looks like it's preparation for a catalog of coats of arms. So they make an index of coats of arms in a separate journal that correlates with all of the stuff that they're interested in all these journals, so they can find them again. And then other things like what you see on the right there as a description of the heraldry of William of Aquitaine, but it's obviously written on the torn off bottom of a letter. This one from an S. Salisbury. And then there's some things that are just whimsical. This is a bookmark that was in one of the catalogs. It seems pretty intentional. I don't know what to make of it, but this is a dreadful, dreadful poem. If you Google it or search newspapers.com, you can find it. But this is probably the one stanza that might have amused her. It's called "My Girl." It's really terrible, but searching for it, this is definitely Rebecca's bookmark, because it ran in the papers in the 1870s after Anna was gone. And then to sort of just finish up some of the library books specifically, she has a set of Appel's Repertorium, and they're very strange. If you look at the book on the left, you can see that there's, from a previous owner, something written in orange crayon, and when the books were closed, it transferred from one page to the other. You can see it in reverse on one side and correct on the other. And the only way that could happen is if that piece of blue paper is not there. And then the blue paper has the markings on it. And actually, literally between every single page, they rebound, or one of them did, the whole 7 volumes with a piece of blue paper between every page for making notes. So, I mean, these books are not for decoration. This for work. And you can see an example. There aren't that many translated coins and medals as you go through them, but they're definitely enough. And so this is how they were using those books. And also in the library are the journals of the American Journal of Numismatics. And this is where you will find their names if you search for them. They were both honorary members of the Boston Numismatic Society. And they show up on this list twice, I think, in the run of the journal, at least in the 19th century. And some contemporary secondary source records that were scanned, the Newman Portal of the Bostonian Society. In there, it says that Anna was inducted in 1861. I haven't found anything older, anything that directly says so, but the journal doesn't start, I don't think, until 1866 or something like that. It's after Anna's death, so who knows? And Rebecca is nominated in 1883. She's nominated by Jeremiah Colburn. Jeremiah Colburn also has big roots in Leominster, and their families probably knew each other. There's a lot of Colburn named buildings and stuff in Leominster as well as Salisbury. So perhaps he knew her. Why it's 1883 when he nominates her, but he nominates her, she accepts and becomes an honorary member of the society. And so searching through these journals for ephemera, like I was showing you before, I found this one, and it really stopped me. It's an entry about a Kufic script coin, and it's signed S, and someone has gone and written the initial R in front of that S. And I realized, well, is she contributing to these journals, right? It seems like she must be. And so I checked this coin in their catalog, and sure enough, it is there. And in the American Journal of Numismatics, it says it was brought to the country by a missionary and then translated by one of our Oriental scholars. But in her own catalog, she says the missionary is Henry Harris Jessup, and Edward Elbridge Salisbury is the professor. And now this is her cousin. He teaches at Yale, and he's very important in that field. He's a specialist in Sanskrit and Arabic. And the whole right-hand page of the book is in his hand, explaining the piece, which is interesting. So that could also explain why some of the handwriting is hard to read, because there might be guest appearances by other people. It's really hard to know. But there are things connected with Rebecca in the Salisbury papers at Yale. So I want to check those out. There's even some scrapbooks. Hopefully I can find a picture of her, or who knows. But also there's documentary material. So with this idea, I started looking for other things. In the page before that one, there's one that's signed RS. And this is the first one. And in her catalog, there it is. It's the description of this sort of encrusted coins that came out of, from a shipwreck. It's described very, very similarly. I haven't seen anything like this at the museum, but she has a catalog page for it in her section on Spanish coins. And then there's this one, which is a translation of the introduction of Appel's Repertorium. And like I told you about the blue paper, I checked, and there it is. There's an English translation of the German introduction in the book, which is almost a word-for-word match for what shows up in the American Journal of Numismatics. I then found, because I was going through the things, a small notebook, which was from the Repertorium, that has medals of popes in it, and the introduction is translated again there. Only here, in the same handwriting, there's a lot of crossouts and changes, and some of them are accepted in the final version, some of them are not. But it seems to make a case for the fact that she might have translated it herself. I have no idea, because they also publish volume 4 and 7's introductions translated to English, and there isn't one of these for those. What those have are these slips of paper tucked into the books themselves, which are in English and do match up, but that is someone else's handwriting altogether. So I have no idea what that is. Now, also the Repertorium, again, to show that these are known, she's a known and working numismatist. Someone sends some rubbings to the editors of the journal. They send them to her. She identifies the pieces in the Repertorium, and they publish it. So it's an example of them going to her for her expertise. And then one of the last ones I'll show is this is one of her most substantial contributions to the journal. It's Coins of the English East India Company under Great Britain, and there's several pages of this text in her catalog, and then there's pages going along with each of the coins, and the coins were listed as having been in her cabinet. And this piece is referenced in 1902. And here's an editorial. This is after her death, where it says that this topic has not been dealt with in English, except for maybe Miss Salisbury in April 1877. And this is the only time her name is actually associated directly with something that she wrote. But it's clear that this was her submission, and it's clear, I think, from the other ones too, because you can find them in the catalog, you can find them in the books, and so that this was still considered useful as long after as 1902 is interesting. The last entry in the journal that is signed S or RS is actually the first thing I showed you at the beginning, and it's the coins in public institutions. And she, assuming she wrote this, already knew what she was going to do when she did it. So her will was written in 1888, and what happens is this article is pretty accurate, and then it does describe actually a medal that in the middle here. It describes a medal that she gave to Leominster. There's a talk about somewhere it's about the collecting of things when they happen, because after they get old it becomes hard, and it's the Bunker Hill Monument medal that she's talking about specifically, and there is one of those in the medals that she gave to so there's a connection. Could be others, but that does rhyme. And when the collection comes to the MFA, so do several others following her. And oh yeah, well, the other thing I wanted to show is, like, she doesn't get, when she dies, she doesn't get an in memoriam, just like they often do. There's no mention of her in the journal, but it's not, can't be Jeremiah Colburn's fault, because she and Jeremiah actually die on the same day. This was one of those other things where I was looking at the death record, and then I saw Leominster, and I saw who it was, and they died on the same day, December 30th, 1891. And he gets a big, as you can imagine, I mean, he was one of the engines of the Boston Numismatic Society and the journal, gets an in memoriam on the front page, into the second page of the next issue. But Rebecca doesn't get mentioned. That's not that I could ever find. And that, of course, isn't his fault. And then this is the last image I have. This is what was called the coin room in that catalog that I showed you, pictures from 1900 to 1906. So more collections have come in. And so after the Salisbury bequest, which is about 2,500 things, the Boston Numismatic Society themselves gave their cabinet to the museum, which is a little over 500 things. And then in 1901, Augustin Shurtleff, who was a former member of the Boston Numismatic Society, gave an enormous collection. He collected everything to the museum. So from having little to nothing that can be shown to public within a decade, there are literally thousands of pieces in the collection, and the collection continues to grow. And there are later members of the Boston Numismatic Society who give. Samuel Abbott Green does in 1917, and there are others. And so that's basically why I'm arguing that this was a foundational gift, because all these other things came after, and they're all connected, and the museum didn't have it before. And that's my pitch.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Patrick. That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, who knew? So I hope there's going to be a related publication here, because it definitely deserves to be written up.
There's a lot to pick through. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so we'll open it up for questions. You can type those into the chat, and I will present the questions to Patrick as we go here. So yeah, it's kind of a treasure hunt digging up all this, the vital information and so forth.
It really is, and it's in a way the lack of attention to some of this material is why it's still there to be found. So there is, it's sort of a good and bad at the same time, right? Not much has been done to sort of emphasize or talk about who they were and what their contribution to the museum was, and it's been, it's in there.
All right, I have one question. Is the Jones Salisbury collection on display at MFA today?
There are a number of pieces that can be found. The Massachusetts silver is on display. I think the Roma coin that well, I guess I stopped sharing my screen. There's, I think, one or two of the cobs and things like that. A lot of the collection is European, and a lot of it is Asian, and we don't have much of that material on view at all. We and typically haven't. The Asian galleries are beginning a revitalization. Hopefully, some coins can come out then. But in the American collection, there are several good things that you can find. And of course, over the years, the museum has thinned out the collection as duplicates come in, and and so, for example, there's a Hawaiian coin that came from them, which I thought was very interesting given her brother's connections with Hawaii, and it was what's it called, the Hapa Haneri, and I went to find it in storage, and the one that we have in storage is from Augustin Shirtliff. And I looked in the Shirtliff ledgers, and Shirtliff gave 3 of them to the museum. So that must have been the best one. It's not theirs. So there's a lot of that too that you have to take into account.
Any indication that the mass silver pieces came through the family?
I would love to be able to prove that. They are in all of they appear in the draft catalog and in the summary catalog. So I think they do date to Anna's time. They didn't get contributed necessarily by Rebecca unless they were working together. And that's the other thing that I can't say one way or the other. Was it a clean cut? Did Anna just hand it off to Rebecca because she knew she was interested in it? Or was it something that they shared an interest in and they worked on together before it became Rebecca's, which would help some of the weird chronologies of things make sense when you're looking at the handwriting and stuff.
Or the mass silver pieces, are those high grade?
They've never been graded. They're in great shape. And we have 13 pieces of Massachusetts silver. They're all on view, but these are the 2 from Salisbury.
Okay, so yeah, if they're high grade, they could be through the family.
It could be her great grandmother's dowry there.
Yeah.
But
have you been able to find either of these 2 individuals in bid books from like the 1860s, 1870s?
That's a great question. When I do, anytime I see one that has names that's of that vintage, I look.
Sure.
I haven't made like a concerted effort to go through everything that might be on the portal or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I always look for them. Have not seen them. And it would be really interesting if they did bid. I can say though, some things I just don't I only kind of understand why people don't know who they are, because they know that they're collecting. They know that, that they know things. It's not secret. So it's not improper, right? You saw the diary where one of her friends brings her child over and they go through the coins together. But a lot of the things, the books, like her copy of Crosby, for example, is from when it was new, and one of the subscribers in the back is a Salisbury, and it was her cousin, so he was one of the original subscribers, got the book, signed it over to her on Christmas, and so she has an early Crosby, but she didn't buy it, and that I wonder also if there are people who are buying things for them, right? They say, oh, here are the things I'm interested in when you go, keep me in mind. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, without her full name on the articles in American Journal of Numismatics, there's obviously not a named auction sale. Yeah, people don't know who they are.
And that's one of the interesting things about the American Journal of Numismatics is, I mean, at this time anyway, they all use their initials, right? So
Right.
she's not just doing it, the only one doing it. Everybody signs their things with their initials.
Right.
A lot of times it's really obvious who they are because their names are on the cover, or they are had from big sales, or they've written books. And then there are the ones that you can't tell who they are, and maybe there are other women. There may be you can't necessarily be sure who some of the less recognizable names are, given this, I think. But yeah, that I mean, there's an index done, right, of the first 50 years of the AJN, and she's not in it. Her articles, if you find them by name, they are, but her name's not. And they knew she did them, so I don't know. I can't quite figure that out.
Yeah, yeah, that's totally right. I mean, everyone was using their initials. That was not unusual at all. So, and not just in American Journal of Numismatics. I mean, I was in a lot of publications. People were just using initials. All right. Any other questions? Please enter them in the chat. So, besides the May silver, are there other U.S. colonial coins in the collection?
There are some on the well, what I was able to share is basically things that had photography, right? Not everything has photography, but there's a Immunis Columbia that was on the front slide. I picked that because it went well with the Gobrecht, the two-seated liberties facing each other, and the Gobrecht, that's one of the restrikes, and in one of the 1860s articles in the AJN, I forget who it is. He's correcting something that was published somewhere else about this piece, right? This is your thing, right? The Gobrecht stuff, and there's a black X marking the article in ink. So she made a note of it, and she had one. So there are these, but if you bought it in a bookstore and it was all marked up like that, you would not, it wouldn't be able to translate any history for you.
But yeah, I mean, Gobrecht dollars, Munis Columbia, these are big coins. I mean, you suspect they had to be buying these from either dealers or auctions.
And they had probably fewer American things than they did European and we'll say Oriental things, right? The Middle East and Asia. So they clearly had an interest in I don't know, there's a book of heraldry that's like 6 inches thick, and it's from 1705, and it's really beautiful, but it's just filled with images of heraldry, and they use that for interpreting the coins.
I can't help myself. I have a copy of American Numismatics before the Civil War in front of me, so I have to look up and see if Salisbury is in here.
No,
Nope.
and actually, what does he call prior to 1850 the cradle age of American numismatic?
Yeah.
And there, at least Anna belongs there.
Oh yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And if you read what he writes about Grew, you get a sense that the book is a little dated at this point because it's very gentle. It doesn't talk about any of the things that Joel Oros has been writing about in the asylum. If anybody is interested in Grew, I recommend reading those articles. I did not say very much about Grew, and if it seemed like a lot, he could be a movie. He's quite something.
Yeah, and Joel was able to get a lot of good material out of Newman Portal for that topic too. And with more and more internet resources, we find out more about these people. So yeah, I mean the stuff Joel wrote is definitely the most current thought on that topic.
I mean, anything that I found, let's say, for this talk, that like Ralph Waldo Emerson, whatever, I found all that online, right? Like it wasn't go to the library and pull down all of the Emerson books and try to find things in there. And I think Dave's book's in 1998 or something like that, right? So there's really not, can't do that yet.
And there's a ton of great information in the book. I refer to it often. But yeah, you're right. We just have more and more resources in the last few years. All right. A couple links were posted in the chat to some of the mass silver pieces in the MFA collection. So you can check those out. All right. But I think we're probably at the end of the questions. So we'll wrap it up there. So Patrick, yeah, thanks a lot. And I really look forward to seeing a publication on this. That's great. This could easily be in the Numismatist or the ANS magazine. It's a super great topic. So
I was thinking about the ANS fellow, so I'm that's my first thought. And but then well, you asked me to do something, so I thought, oh, I could do that. So that, but that's kind of what I was thinking. Ultimately, they may say yes to.
Excellent. Okay, we'll wrap it up there, and we'll have additional sessions tomorrow and Saturday. So hope to see everyone on those. So thanks a lot.
Thanks everyone for listening.
Bye-bye.